And we are live.
Hi, Luke. Hi, everybody. I'm Libby Ingracia, and I'm the program director for the IBM Champions program, and I'm your co-host for the IBM Champions Chat series. The IBM Champions are the very best of the best. They demonstrate extraordinary expertise in IBM offerings, and they also offer incredible support for technical communities. The IBM Champions program finds these thought leaders and experts and advocates so we can recognize and reward their achievements, and then we help them amplify their voices and expertise. One example of that is right here, our IBM Champions Chat series. About twice a month, my co-host Luke and I will invite a couple of IBM champions to share their knowledge and expertise with all of you. Luke, a couple of weeks ago, you and our colleague Jeff spoke to the champions about how you each podcast. And today we have the follow-up to that.
Yes, we do. I'm excited about it because not only are these champions great technologists, they're also podcasters. So we have a lot in common and a lot to talk about.
And it kind of seems like they do some things the same as you and Jeff, and some things totally different, and some things the same, and some things totally different from each other. So I think we're going to learn a lot about the how, but I think even more importantly, we're going to learn about the why and the what they're getting out of it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and bring in our guests today. These two IBM champions, as Luke said, are both experienced podcasters and technologists, and they're here to talk about their how and their why. Alex Walter and Reg Harbeck. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Thanks, Libby.
Greetings.
Audience, please feel free to, drop any questions in the chat and we'll get those answered. But for now, why don't you guys do some introducing of yourselves?
Alex.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Alex Walter. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for A3J Group. We specialize in consulting and technology solutions around the IBM Maximo platform, which is an enterprise asset management software solution from IBM. Most of our companies are big into like physical asset infrastructure, maintenance of equipment, and the IBM Maximo platform helps them get the most value out of those assets in their life cycle. So been working in the Maximo space now for over 15 years, actually before it was even acquired by IBM back in 2006. So have quite a few years of experience under our belts in working with the program. So kind of just following on with what Libby said, we are not just technology enthusiasts at A3J Group, but we also started a podcast 2 years ago. I was invited to participate as a guest on a podcast around reliability-centered maintenance and mobility solutions in the industry, and thought what a great really avenue for content to get some of the messaging out about Maximo and about what some of the great people in our industry are doing. There's a lot of great folks that have been around Maximo for a long time, many years, and we were excited to have some guests on and get that word out. So, Reg, why don't you give us? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you, Alex. So I'm Reg Harbeck. I've been working in the IBM mainframe environment since the mid-1980s. The IBM mainframe in its current iteration was announced in April 7th, 1964, and has been advanced and enhanced ever since then. Has become the system of record for the world economy. And so when I had the opportunity after finishing my computer science bachelor's degree to work on the IBM mainframe platform, it just became like no looking back experiences. I just discovered this whole wonderful universe of excellence and amazing people. And so over the next few decades, as I built my career as a systems programmer and then doing a wide range of other things on the mainframe and becoming a communicator of the mainframe and other such things, I sort of built this this experience of bringing together both technology and people. And so then when I founded or co-founded my company Mainframe Analytics in 2011, I started doing a whole lot more of the communication focus activity while staying technically active. And that led in 2016 to the good folks at the IBM Systems magazine asking me if I would be willing to do a regular podcast where I would interview people who are members of the mainframe ecosystem, which I jumped on the opportunity. And it's just been absolutely wonderful. And the neat thing is, having many years experience working on the mainframe, I have this experience of knowing how to talk to mainframers. And that matters a lot, because these are often very deep and quite honestly, quite often very introverted people who are not that comfortable speaking in a public context. But if you speak the same language, then you have this opportunity to kind of bring that together and share those insights. And you start to discover what amazing people make the world economy go round, because effectively that's what the mainframe does, is runs the world economy. And so over the past 4 years, I've had this opportunity to interview all these absolutely amazing people and really scratch the surface and find out who they are, what they've done, how they gotten there. And the neat thing is that rather than focusing then on the traditional technical aspects of a podcast, the high quality equipment and all these things that are important, but I've taken a more casual approach where I just use my iPhone, or maybe record using something such as Skype or whatever, and then we transcribe it. And so rather than having to have a perfect sound, we actually go through the process. Our post-processing is about processing the text instead. And so although the audio is available as part of the replay, the link that you can see at the bottom of your screen, the text is there for searching and for reading really carefully. And we make sure that it accurately reflects what's actually said. So it's been just a wonderful experience. And I'm so grateful to the folks at the IBM Systems magazine for letting me do this, because it's just been a wonderful opportunity to really get to know and build a historical record of who the mainframe community is.
That's great. So tell me, how do you get guests for your podcast? I'm obviously in this as well, just looking for tips and tricks on how do you find these guests?
Yeah, no, that's, that I have to say the first thing and the best thing in some ways about the podcast is it gave me permission to reach out to people that were too important for me to talk to. And suddenly I could reach out to them and discover how human they are. The first discovery you make when you talk to important people is they're as human as everybody else. The next discovery you make when you talk to introverts is that they're as amazing as everybody else as well. And sometimes they're the same people. But that reaching out to people such as Bob Rogers and Dr. Cameron Say and a number of the really high visibility people in the mainframe community was sort of my beginning move. And then having done that, it gave me an excuse to start talking to other people who were in important positions, for example, in the Share board, because I'm quite involved with the Share mainframe user association. And then having done that, just kind of look around and start to discover all the other people. And once you open up your eyes and you start to see all the amazing people, all these really ordinary seeming people turn out to be these amazing people. And you just kind of, it's sort of like one of those dances where you link arms with people and move from person to person. And everyone sort of, refers you to the next person. And one time, actually, I was at Share in Atlanta, and I had set up an interview with one person, a lady named Marianne now Knudsen, and she brought a friend of hers, Susan Rice, into the interview. And she says, you got to interview Susan as well. So I finished interviewing Marianne, and then I interviewed Susan. And Susan was somebody I knew of, but had never really gotten to know. And Susan turned out to be this absolutely amazing person I would have never gotten to know and interview if it weren't for Marianne having actually made that introduction. And so often I see that people actually reach out to me and say, you got to interview this person. And once you've got that visibility, then you started getting those connections. But Alex, you've done, I guess, about 12 interviews now. You've probably had some interesting experiences figuring out who to talk to as well.
Yeah, there's some amazing people in the Maximo space. But what we've tried to do is focus on just a wide range of topics and individuals too, right? So I've got a big technology passion and love to talk about it. But there's so many other types of people and roles within organizations that come together to make an enterprise asset management program work. I mean, you talk about like culturally, you talk about just process-wise, technology, and so we try and pick guests that kind of go across all of these bands and roles just to keep it interesting. Because I mean, if it's interesting for me, hopefully it's interesting for the guests. So, and like I said, there's just a lot of really interesting people in the Maximo space. So we've had a good time with it, definitely.
Now, for those of us who are focused on a different platform, maybe if you can just give us a quick understanding of what is Maximo and what does it touch on?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on a little bit in the intro, but really it's a cross-industry asset management program. What I mean by asset management is actual physical equipment. So businesses that are heavy into, let's say, manufacturing, utilities, oil and gas, power generation, large-scale facilities like universities, airports, transportation companies. So you talk about anybody who relies on equipment to run their business, and that's what Maximo is meant for, is managing that equipment from conception to commissioning and into ultimately retirement. So that's what Maximo is all about.
Now, does that must use an underlying database to keep track of all that stuff?
It does. So Maximo uses the IBM DB2 platform as well as some other commercially available databases, and also uses the IBM WebSphere platform for serving up web pages that the application runs on. So it's got a nice little IBM technology stack there that we've been able to get our hands into over the years. So on that, tell me a little bit more about technology that you deal with on a day-to-day basis.
So it's kind of fun as you talk about what Maximo does. It reminds me of one of the applications that I worked with back halfway through my career in the I guess the late 80s. I guess it was early in my career. I was working on a COBOL application called ESYS, Electrical System Construction Information System, which was a package that was sort of architected and then sold to various organizations. I worked on it for the city of Calgary in Canada. Back when they had mainframes, and we wrote this thing in COBOL, and it was designed to do, sounds very similar to what Maximo now does. But one of the neat things that I've found in the mainframe is that wonderful range of areas that it covers, and so many of the original solutions for doing stuff were written on the mainframe. For example, the original production database, in some ways you could say, was IMS, which predates DB2 and yet is still in use. IMS Information Management System was created before the Apollo moon launches, but then was repurposed and refined for use with that. And so as a result, it became the way they tracked all the parts for the Apollo rockets. And so you see this really neat history and this whole range of things, because back in the 1960s, there weren't a lot of options for business computing. And so when IBM announced the System 360, which could run, the full range from very small computers to very large ones, and they promised anything you wrote for it would run into the future, that continued to be the case. And so you have these uses that became embedded in how we do things, even today. And I think that's a really neat thing that I've sort of experienced. And so we talk about some of the neat implications that's resulted in terms of both the positive and sometimes negatives of the term legacy. So it's sort of neat to see how all that kind of spreads together and then see the culture and how that fits in. Now, that said, before I spend a bunch more time talking about that, which I will, tell me a bit about the culture of the Maximo users. I mean, what do you find they have in common?
Well, definitely a drive for efficiency, right? So the biggest thing that users bring to me is, Alex, how can we be more efficient in what we're doing? And efficiency comes in the terms of technology, right? So better leveraging technology to be more efficient comes in the form of process, right? So how can we maybe streamline this a little bit better, and then it comes in the form of culture as well, and what the organization is willing to accept process-wise. So it's I would say those three things really make up what people are truly looking for. The technology stuff is what I'll always come back to, because I love it. You mentioned something really interesting, and I'm thinking about this in terms of other either IBM champions who are watching this or just people who are interested in podcasting in general. So if we're talking about maybe how to help some people start one of these podcasts on their own, you mentioned some technology that you were using, and something that was really interesting that stood out was the transcript. So when I started our podcast, I didn't even think about that. And I haven't thought about it until we had a recent conversation. So tell me a little bit more about that aspect of the podcast itself.
Yeah, and this is one of the neat things for me. My podcast is a podcast like anybody else's, but it's got some unique aspects. And one of them is it really is textually oriented, shall we say, that a lot of podcasts see themselves as audio experiences, not that much different from listening to music, and right. So people use high quality recording equipment. I think the three of you wearing these high quality headphones is such a good illustration of that. These are audio quality, and here I am listening with iPod headphones, because I'm taking this very nerdy approach that it's the data that's the thing, and not necessarily the quality of presentation. Which doesn't mean quality is bad, but that my approach has been working with the folks at IBM Systems Magazine, which of course was a text-oriented thing, being a publication, right from the beginning, that it's about the text. And so one of the beauties, of course, of a podcast is that you can listen to it at multiple speeds. I love doing that sort of thing. For me, I love listening to podcasts at 1.75 speed, just because that's how fast I talk. So that works for me. But that the idea then of spending the post-production time on the text rather than on making the audio perfect has worked out really well in my case. And that said, one of the things that I've found is that computers do not play a really great role in that yet. Not only do computers not know when sentences and paragraphs end, but they are absolutely terrible at jargon or even personal names. And of course, on the mainframe, we have a lot of jargon. And so as a result, what happens instead is that the folks at IBM Systems Magazine will take the audio I've recorded, which I almost never edit. Only when I have to join two broken pieces together because there's an interruption or something like that. But I send that to them, and they send it to a transcription service. And those folks, I don't know if they use computers for part of what they do, but they clearly have people involved, because by the time that IBM Systems Magazine get it, it appears to already be broken nicely into sentences and paragraphs, and attributing who the speaker is and all that kind of thing. And then they review it and catch anything they can, and then they send it to me. And then I go through it and I catch, names of things, historical things, and all the jargon that, unless you're actually part of the ecosystem, you're just not going to recognize that. And so by the time we've done that, we've created a document of substantial value, which, again, you can Google and find. And so as a result, if somebody is looking for information about this particular, let's say, obscure piece of software, they come across this podcast because one of the people I was talking to actually referred to that software, and so they have a hook into that and start to understand, and they have somebody they can talk to about it. How about you?
That was a light bulb moment for me when we talked about that. It's like, man, if we could transcribe these interviews and actually publish them, have them searchable, etc., that would be huge as far as getting the content out to more people. So I thought that was brilliant.
Now that said,
it seems like
really
this
hard.
is a Watson. I'm sorry to interrupt, Reg. No, it seems like this is a solution. I need you guys to start building a bot with Watson to take the text, the speech to text, so that you can have that, and then get it translated and everything. It seems like that's maybe not the primary use for podcasting and finding technology, but it seems like it is definitely a potential use.
Well, I'm going to jump in with an opinion on this with you. Forgive me, Alex, because I've got to say, I think that'll be one of the last things we ever figure out how to do. Because, and I'm, as you know, I'm just finishing my master's degree, and the subject of my thesis is the humanity of the mainframe. As I dig into technology and humanity and the connections and the differences, that the things that have to do with processing human language, especially when you're dealing with more than just mere grammar and spelling, require such human consciousness. And not merely rule-based intelligence, but actual consciousness. I mean, the jokes we make when we're talking, the references, the puns, and I'm terrible for puns, as anybody who knows me knows. All those things make it nearly impossible for a computer, even Watson, to figure out consistently. So even though it might be able to attribute who's saying what, and maybe even put in paragraph breaks, to catch the spelling of really subtle references and see, what's being actually said, let alone put a comma in the right place, is something I think will be a very long time before technology can do that. Alex, what do you think?
Well, I think just getting it 80% of the way there. I'm all about the 80-20 rule. Like I love the 80-20 rule. So getting it 80% of the way there with the voice to text, and then maybe having somebody go through and review it. It's something that I think absolutely I want to take advantage of, because I think it's just getting the content in that other format and transcribing it, I think would be huge for us and our ability to amplify what we're talking about in the community. So, but I think I like the take on it. I absolutely agree that sort of melding context into what people are saying is something that's going to be really difficult to solve long term.
Well, I like the implicit what you're saying, that basically humanity is the 20% in the 80-20 rule, isn't it?
Right.
It's like that's the stuff that you can't automate. That's the stuff that's not easy. That's the stuff that makes it real.
Agreed. But a lot of what we do, at least initially, is, show me that happy path, right? So what is that? 80% of the time we're going to do it this way. So let's nail that. Let's dial that in, right? And then that 20% is what we iterate on over time and try and, let's get it down to 16, 15, and just continually make it better over time.
Now, that said, you've really focused also on the technical aspects of making the podcast better from an audio and comfort perspective, and you've really worked hard to help your interviewees feel not just put at ease during the interview, but that they're really happy with the result that you've created from an audio perspective. How do you do that?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned the introverts, right? So I would consider myself I was about to say a little bit of a nerd, but that would be maybe underselling it a bit. But when you get out and start talking to people, a lot of them, wait, we're recording this, it's got to be perfect kind of thing. And, just to get people comfortable and recognize that it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a conversation, right? We're just talking. So coming up with strategies for that, what I started to do was to have just a 30-minute brainstorming session before the actual recording of the podcast, just to, get them comfortable with not only the content, what types of questions, etc., but just the cadence of each other's voices, right? Just bouncing back and forth and making it like a real conversation with two people that have had this type of conversation before. And many of my guests, we have, history of conversing about Maximo and all that, but some of them not as much maybe, and maybe not as much recently. So just having that 30 minutes beforehand, I found really effective. But also the thing that was really interesting over time that I noticed was that I started recording those sessions, because some of the best conversations happened in that brainstorming session. Because people, you put them on live and you say, okay, we're recording now, and it's like, okay, I gotta perform, and sometimes it's like they lock up a little bit, right? But when you're just free form conversation, some of those conversations are just wonderful. So I started recording those, and then what you talked about as far as the editing components and some of the things that we do there, we're able to splice in some of those conversation bits and pieces where it makes sense at the end. I've even had people come back to me afterwards and say, you know what, that answer I gave you on that last question, can we re-record that? Because I got some new things. I was thinking about that overnight. It's like, yeah, sure, why not? Let's do it. And so, yeah, we've my wife and I run A3J Group. She's actually the president, but she does most of our marketing stuff, and she's a wizard when it comes to some of the technology around editing, splicing, etc. And she's done a great job with it. So it helps to have a partner in crime for sure.
Something, of course, that we can't do while we're here live streaming is exactly that, Alex. It made me go
Right.
back to think of the conversations that we've had preparing to talk here and thinking, oh, now wait, what was that he said that I wanted to bring up? Where are my notes? We can't
Right.
go back and find that. So that means you all have to be, perfect and brilliant here. Oh, no, wait, just brilliant, not perfect.
or perfectly imperfect.
There you go.
There you go.
Exactly.
But I just really want to affirm how important what Alex says about putting people at ease is. I think we all grow up watching news, feeling terrified of having somebody stick a microphone in our face because we've seen what happens to some. Think of 60 Minutes ambush interviews, for example. And it's so important that when we interview somebody for podcasts, that they get put at ease, that they know that we're not trying to ambush them, that we're not trying to put them on the spot or make them look bad, that we genuinely are interested in what they have to say. And we're going to make sure that they're happy with it before it ever goes live. And I think taking that time before you start the official interview, whether or not you're recording, and obviously making sure that you don't publish anything without their permission. For me, the way I do that is I let them know officially when we're recording. And there's only been about 2 or 3 interviews where, afterwards people said, you know what, I wasn't quite happy with that. Can we do it again? And other than that, basically we could just go live with it because they know and they're happy with it. But like you say, start out with, putting them at ease, talking to them, and getting them comfortable. And Alex, you and I even did this before today, that you and I spent time getting to know each other. So we had a sense of each other's style and personality. What are some of the other things you do in order to make sure that the result is of high quality?
Well, definitely, like you said, the making sure that people are comfortable is number one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Any comfort level results in free flowing conversation, and that's what people are interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Being authentic in what you say and how you say it, laughing, enjoying yourselves, but also exploring people's passions, right? So I think those types of things, once you get into the nitty gritty and you can start to see or hear the excitement. You can see it now because we're live streaming, but you can hear the excitement in a podcast when you really touch on a subject that somebody gets like, okay, yeah, that's exciting to me. That's when you start to explore those areas, and that's when really good conversation comes out. But as far as making a high quality production, I think it starts with making sure people are comfortable, but not just comfortable with what you're going to talk about, but comfortable with the process, right? So, okay, process number one, here's what we're going to do. We're going to use this technology. So let's go ahead and, test that out and make sure that works. And, because we were actually talking about this before we jumped on the live stream, but, less anxiety about talking during the live stream and more anxiety around, is the power going to go out, technology wise, does everything work? Do I have audio? All that stuff. So just making sure people are comfortable with the technology and they're not going to be fumbling with the technology right before they're about to have a conversation. So we tend to schedule those things ahead of time, just, maybe a day or two ahead of recording. We'll just jump on real quick. Does everything work? Okay, great. And then, what's going to happen during the interview? Okay, we're going to start off with a quick intro, a quick bio, and then here are some of the topic areas we want to explore. And then afterwards, it's going to be about a 2-week process to splice everything together, get it edited. We're targeting this date for release. We're going to send you a link ahead of time before it goes out, so you'll have an opportunity to listen. If you have any feedback, if you have any, hey, I didn't like the way this came out, we want to do something else. So just really just getting them comfortable with the process, I think is helpful in coming up with a good end product. How about yourself? Same thing.
And yes and no. One of the interesting things that I've done that is probably non-standard is, with only a few exceptions, when I finish the interview, I thank people and tell them when I think it's going to go live. And when it goes live, I publish a link and I tag them in it. But unless they actually ask to listen to the interview or review the transcript, which only happens about one time in 15, generally they find out about it because they already know what they said, because they know I'm not going to edit what they said at all, because of the fact that I just go with the straight recording. And so then it goes live. I tag them on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, a few other media sites, and so they know right away. And I see them Now, that said, I've had a couple of cases where people review the transcript and they caught something I missed, or where there was something they said that they felt they didn't want to show up in search engines. And so we just, said, okay, we'll keep the audio there, but we won't keep that in the transcript. And so that sort of just gives them that comfort, because their employer said, yeah, that just says something we don't really want associated with us, even though it's not a bad thing. And so that said, just being able to do that, as part of the live experience, because of course the neat thing is, since this is posted online, you can edit it online and make a change to it real time.
Right.
And that's one of the beauties of this as well, is it's not going out in print, and so you have that opportunity. Now, one of the other things I wanted to ask, although Libby's going to say something first, go ahead.
You can always tell. So what's interesting to me here is, we're focusing very much on how you do this, right? How you podcast, et cetera. But what I'm curious about is, what would you say to the people that might be wanting to be guests on your shows or on other shows, to be excellent at being guests, right? I think, and Luke and Jeff talked about this when we had our session with them. Being a podcast host is awesome, and you guys do a great job at it, but it is a commitment. And so what are the elements of what you do as podcast hosts that might also be applied to the guests, and to how they should approach talking with you guys?
Alex, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I try and stress to guests is that you don't have to talk the whole time. This isn't, where I ask a question and you feel like you need to fill 30 minutes of speaking, right? It's just a conversation, right? We're going back and forth. So don't be afraid to just stop, finish a thought, pause, stop, and let's have some back and forth. I think, those turn out to be the best episodes that we've done, is when there's lots of back and forth, and wide-ranging topics, and it's not just a monologue-ish, So what do you think, Reg?
Yeah, first of all, I totally agree. And I'm just thinking of some anecdotes from my own experience. I didn't grow up being a good presenter or public speaker, although I didn't grow up realizing I wasn't one until I found out firsthand. And when I discovered, after a really horrible experience of not being very good at it, that I eventually joined Toastmasters. And I got good at the formal aspect of it and reasonably comfortable in front of an audience. But it wasn't until I took a pre-sales job and was presenting technology to customers that I had a definitive experience where basically I went in to meet with a customer one day. And the customer was in Toronto, and I was based in Calgary at the time. And I'd flown in the previous night and stayed up to 2 a.m. practicing my presentation and everything. And the next day I was like exhausted, so I drank a whole bunch of caffeine, and now I was goofy. And so I'm going with the customer service person to meet with a customer, and I'm just like all hiked up on caffeine and just joking and everything. And we come away from the meeting, and I'm just so embarrassed. I'm so sorry, I just make an idiot of myself in front of the customer. She says, no, always do that. You were having so much fun, they had fun. And it's like this big aha experience. And for me, that realization that the most important thing when you're in front of an audience is to not be artificial, to be authentic, genuinely authentic, not just pretend to be authentic. And part of the most important way to do that is to have fun, because there's no more authentic thing you can do than to genuinely have fun. And people hook into that, and they emotionally hook into that, and they join you. They become part of that conversation, even as listeners, and certainly as your interlocutors. And so you're talking to this person, you put them at ease because you're having fun talking to them, and you let them know that it's okay to have fun, and suddenly you're having this real human experience. So that would be my thought on that. Libby, did that sort of respond to what you had in mind?
Well, it was definitely one of my favorite answers so far, because I think that's that point of having fun and having conversation. And you can sort of feel sometimes in a podcast or a live cast or on stage the moment when that happens. I think we can even, point to some of those moments when we're on champion calls, when you can sort of see that moment that someone starts having, one of the presenters kind of starts having fun. And then, you see the chat going on, and you get that fun vibe feedback that they're feeling it, and so they're feeling cheerful. One of the best compliments I ever got from one of the live champion calls that we do internally was someone saying, I really didn't want to come on this call today. I had so much going on, but man, I feel better now that I'm done. We heard from so many champions and these IBMers who were all enthusiastic, and you're so cheerful, and yeah, and like they left that call, an hour and a half call, and they were like bouncing. And that is now my goal in every call that we do, and in every webcast and podcast and presentation and interview. So I'm glad to hear that that's a broader experience.
Now, one thing we're doing today that I don't do with my podcast, I understand Alex doesn't either, and that is we're doing video. And there's a number of reasons I don't do video, one of which is it's impossible to transcribe. But that video has a lot of aspects to it that can be distracting, although it certainly is humanizing.
You mean like my kids in the background?
Yeah.
Just for example?
Just for example, but and just unless you have one of those artificial backgrounds that you've been able to set up, like with Zoom, which I have not yet successfully done, you've got some aspect of your living space, and you give away a lot of information that is not core to what you're trying to communicate. And yet there are some people who feel there's a lot of advantage to that. I know in our champion calls that you host, Libby, people can be audio and video, or just audio, and you're always video. And it's one of the things that encouraged me to do video in this particular podcast, even though I'm much more comfortable with audio. But I'd like maybe we'll start with Alex, and then also Libby, your thoughts on the difference between just doing audio versus including video.
No, I love the inclusion of video, right? It, like you said, it humanizes everything. So yeah, you might get distractions, you might see fans buzzing in the background, all that stuff, kids walking in the background, but that, to me, that's authentic. We talk about authenticity, right? That's who these are. It's not somebody sitting in a boardroom or something official. These are people with everyday lives and jobs. Certainly play a big part here, but the human element of it is great. I love the video part of it.
I'd like to chime in here on this.
Please,
please
I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just couldn't help myself. I had to jump right in because I actually, the podcast is fine. I started off last year with IBM Developer Podcast doing just audio. So I was going to conferences, and part of that was just the logistics of what could I actually do well by myself, and not trying to overextend. And then maybe it was one of the KubeCons recently, my team came and then did video support. And what was great was now we had two deliverables. We have the video of it shot on multi-camera and the audio. And then transitioning into a quarantine life with no one going to conferences and doing live interviews, I feel like it brought the bar down, where now you're watching a late night television show and they're shooting it on a webcam as well. So I felt less pressure, and now I'm sort of into it. So I've been doing a high performance computing series where I'm interviewing experts at universities, and we're doing both. I'm creating a video, but then we're also going to publish the audio as a podcast. I wanted to parlay this into a question, though, because one of the struggles I have is length. They say that the ideal length for a podcast is under 25 minutes, like 22 minutes, because that was the average commute when people were still commuting. And but I really struggle to keep an interview under an hour. I mean, because like you said, once you activate that and you connect with someone, you get that excitement and that energy. I'm the long format happens. So almost every interview I have is 40 minutes plus.
Yeah, we ourselves try to keep it under 30 minutes. That's our goal. But it's hard. And sometimes we, cut stuff out and leave it on the floor if we think it's either redundant or, but we've had one of them, it was 60 minutes, and we published all 60 minutes because it was fun. It was good. So what about you, Reg? What do you try? Do you have any sort of length?
Well, it's funny. When I first started doing this, I asked the folks at IBM System Journal, how long do you want this to be? And they said, aim for 10 minutes, try not to go past 15. And for the first few years, I was successful at that. And in retrospect, as I think about why, it's because I'm dealing with these wonderful introverts who basically give you the shortest possible answer. And so you have to choose your question carefully to get them to open up. But even so, you have to listen really carefully to their answer and ask a follow-on question to keep them going. And so once you see 10 minutes on the clock, it's really easy to wind it down. But, not all nerds are introverts, and so every so often I encounter an extroverted nerd. And one of my favorite examples of this, actually, I'll give you two examples. One of them is Mike Myers. Well, no, not that Mike Myers. No, not that one either. The mainframe Mike Myers. This guy actually was one of the authors of the original IBM OS 360 operating system. And the guy has been an educator and all this kind of stuff. And this guy is comfortable in front of an audience. And so I asked him the first question at the beginning of the interview, just tell me how you end up in the mainframe. 30 minutes later, he stopped. And it was like, okay, well, this has been a really great podcast. Thank you. But another one is my good friend Ray Mullins. Now, Ray and I have had wonderful conversations since we've known each other. We're both kind of on the extroverted side of being nerds. And so we sat down and I interviewed him, and we just kept going and going. We got to 20 minutes. It's like, oops, okay, we should probably tie up. But that's the exception. Generally speaking, for the ecosystem that I speak to, people are really comfortable giving very brief, concise answers because that's their job. That's what they do. What they do in their jobs. And so it's really easy, but I think it really depends a lot on the audience and the constituency you're speaking to, because a lot of places, you get people going, you wind them up and ask them an open-ended question. And, the thing is, you really don't want to edit that down, do you?
Yeah, you gotta pick and choose, right? One thing I heard you mention earlier, and, it's interesting to me, and I don't know if it would be interesting to anybody watching, but you mentioned Toastmasters. Can you tell me what Toastmasters is?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so basically, just over 100 years ago, there was a fellow who realized just how useful a skill public speaking was, and decided he wanted to help normal people learn to public speak just as part of improving their lives. And his name will come to me possibly, but if it doesn't, just Google him up. But I think it might have been Ralph Smedley, but I could be wrong about that. And in any case, so he created this organization, and the whole organization is all about helping ordinary, normal people get comfortable public speaking. And it walks you through this whole process. And so you go to a meeting of Toastmasters instead of, it is Ralph Smedley. Thank you, Libby. Basically, instead of being in a high stress environment like having to present at work or even at university, which is where I first crashed and burned, it's among other people who are also, it's a self-help group. It's like a bunch of people who know they're not yet good at public speaking, and they're not there to call each other down. They're there to encourage each other and get them that experience, that comfort. Because really, I would say in retrospect, the single most important thing about being a good public speaker is not about technique, it's not about style, it's not about content, it's about comfort. It's about feeling able to be yourself. It's just like that one time when I had too much coffee and was goofy in front of the customer, and that was my best presentation because I was being myself. And so for me, just that getting that experience and that comfort that it's okay to be yourself, and then getting some experience you can remember as you go into various presenting circumstances and associate back to. So I remember when I presented this way or that way. And the neat thing is that Toastmasters as an organization gives you the ability to develop so many different sides of yourself, not just public speaking, but organizational, as you can move up into the hierarchy. And they have like chapters all around the world. So no matter where you go, you'll find a local Toastmasters public speaking club. In fact, that's where I met my wife. So just to drill deeper into this, basically, I had way back in the 1980s when I was first, okay, this will confuse you, when I was first married, and I was starting my career, I joined a public speaking Toastmasters club there. And so then I sort of built up my public speaking. So then fast forward 2.5 decades. And basically, after being widowed, I sort of started rebuilding my life. And one of the things I do is move from Calgary to British Columbia. And I wanted to reach out and say, what can I do that will help me rebuild? And so that's one of the reasons I started my master's degree. But I also thought, okay, what used to be a way that helped me advance my life? And I thought Toastmasters. So I reached out to the local Toastmasters club and emailed the president. And the president said, hey, why don't you come on here and give us a presentation? And I said, sure. So I gave a presentation called Around the World in 80 Speeches. And the president was so impressed that she wanted to get to be friends better. And within a couple of years, we were married. So it's sort of value all the way around. So yeah, I definitely speak in favor of Toastmasters.
Excellent. That's really interesting.
You know what I like is that you are talking about a skill that will help you with podcasting and help you be a guest on podcasts. But so many champions and so many and there's my I just one of the folks was commenting that it'll make you stop saying that, and it I typically I don't, but then my brain doesn't keep up or my mouth doesn't keep up, one or the other. What I was going to say is so many of our champions are speakers at events, and now those events are more like live streams and more like webcasts, at least at this moment. So here's my two-part question. Part one, do you find that there is a difference for you? I know, Alex, you've presented at conferences. Reg, I bet you have too. And I know your guests have for sure. Do they find that there's a big difference in being hello, I'm a professional presenter up here with my slideware or my demo versus being in this conversational space of a podcast or a live cast?
Alex?
It's definitely different. With a presentation, like Reg was saying with his presentation in Toronto there, he was up till 2 a.m. practicing, rehearsing, making sure that, transitions and slides and everything. It's you speaking more to an audience, maybe not so much in in the meeting room in Toronto, but definitely at these conferences. You're not expected to be interactive with the audience until maybe the Q&A session at the end, and so it's very much telling stories and weaving in things that you think that will keep the audience's attention and really engage the audience from your storytelling ability, versus podcasting, which is definitely more like it's 100% interactive, right? You're not there to tell a story to the audience who's listening. You're there to have a conversation with someone, and that conversation is what is going to engage the audience. So it's different, preparing for one versus another, but there's similarities too. What do you think, Reg?
Yeah, first of all, I totally agree. And I think in some ways the big difference is, as you point out, that for the duration of the podcast, right from the beginning, it's a conversation. Okay, granted, some people do podcasts where they give a presentation, and I listen to a number of those. But for the type of podcast that you and I are doing, where it's going to be an interview format or even a conversational format, that right from the word go, you're not up on your soapbox saying anything. You're interacting with people, and the beauty of it is that you pull the audience in. So like today, we've got the 4 of us up on the screen, and anybody who's watching us can feel like they're part of that conversation too, and they can actually type their comments and ask questions and be part of the conversation. Whereas once you're up on a stage, it's like everybody's looking at you and they want to hear what you're going to say next, and you basically tell them how to think, how to feel, until you get to that Q&A session. Unless you have a heckler, you're basically, it's just you up there, and so just a very different feeling. And I have to say, I really appreciate the podcast feeling, because it's so much more human, and it's so much more individual. And it really reminds me of Chris Anderson's book, The Long Tail, about how, with the internet, we can do that custom experience, and it allows us to share that, in a way that other people then can get, joined into that conversation, versus merely being an audience member after the fact.
One other thing that I like about the podcasting format is when you're presenting, you have a series of slides. Let's say you have 20 slides in a deck, and that's the roadmap that you're going to follow throughout the presentation. In podcasting, you might ask a question, and then you wind up meandering down some lane of conversation you never even knew you were gonna. I didn't know we were gonna talk about Toastmaster today. That was really interesting to me, but that was kind of cool. I didn't have like a prepared slide to talk about that, but we had a conversation back and forth. We listened, asked questions, and you wind up talking about things that you never even knew ahead of time. So I find that very interesting.
That's part of the authenticity of it, isn't it?
Now, and speaking of being a good listener, I think it's also that podcasting and live casting like this, it makes you be a better, more attentive listener. You're less planning what you're about to say next and more focusing on understanding and hearing what your co-conversationalists are putting out there. Reg, I'm going to let you say the next thing, and then I've got a couple that have come in. So finish your thoughts there, and then I'll drop some questions in.
My question was going to be, Libby, do we have any questions?
Great minds, Reg, thinking alike.
Well, let me just add this one thought in, and it is,
Please do.
Too often when we have a conversation in our personal lives, we're listening to answer rather than listening to understand. And the beauty of podcasting is it forces us to listen to understand. We're not here to tell the other person. We're here to genuinely listen and respond to what they've said. And so in some ways, a podcast is actually a more genuine conversation than we often have in our real lives. So that's it. Over to you, Libby.
I've just decided that somehow, Luke, we're going to have to get one of the developer advocates to do the Watson magic on this and get the transcript, because there have been a couple of bon mots here, a couple of just pieces that I want to pull out, and I'm wondering if I took good enough notes.
Well, we'll make a transcription, and I do think there is something already. I was thinking about this earlier when we were talking about it. I think there is a code pattern already that we could start from.
Yes.
I'll go looking for it.
We're going to make that happen. All right, here's one question that has come in from the chat. How do you brainstorm new topic ideas and keep your podcast episodes from feeling repetitive, especially because you focus on your various, mainframe and Maximo technologies? Reg, do you want to start, and then Alex?
Well, I'm lucky because one of the things I found consistently is not only are no two mainframe shops the same, no two mainframe people are the same, and you scratch the surface and you discover a whole universe of a wonderful, unique individual that has stuff to tell you that's different from any. So, I mean, if you listen to my podcast, I start asking each person at the beginning of the podcast, how did you end up on the mainframe? How did you end up, at Share or, doing this, that, or the other thing, right? And the answer is always different. And not only is it different, but then by listening to what they say, I can key off of that and ask different questions. And every different one is completely different just because people are so unique. So I'm lucky. Alex, how about you?
Yeah, the Maximo, I would say, ecosystem is so diverse that I don't think I'm ever going to really run out of topics. I mean, you're looking at just from a pure technology perspective, some of the cloud offerings, back-end offerings, front-end offerings, mobile integrations, DevOps, you name it. There's a ton of different topics just on the technology. And then we were talking about culturally, process-wise, all the different verticals when you talk about, manufacturing versus utilities versus facility maintenance. There's a ton. It's really kind of why I have a job, right? Mm-hmm. It's Maximo is so diverse and there's so much there that it's there may come a time where we run out of things to talk about, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
All right, another question. Thank you both, by the way. Another question that I've seen is you talked a little bit about your different approaches to podcasting. One that's much more edited and working on production value, and one that's focused more on just being very raw and focused on the transcript technology. So I heard a little bit about what Reg does for technology in terms of actually using transcriptionists. Alex, do you have any sort of technology pieces that you want to bring out as this is what I use? And Luke, you might want to weigh in here just briefly as well.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I was focused on right from the get-go is not having it be difficult for the guests. I wanted people to be able to just log into a web URL, enable their microphone and speakers through the computer audio and go, not have to download any specific piece of software or anything like that. So we used a piece of software called Zencastr. It was free to start, and so that's been great. They actually deliver the audio in different tracks based on how many people are speaking, which makes it really easy to edit, and that's been great for us. From an editing perspective, we use the Adobe Audition Suite. Super popular. And like I said, my wife is like really good at that. And then from a hosting perspective, we wanted the ability to put the audio out and get it to all the major publications. So we found a piece of software called Buzzsprout, and we use that to host the episodes, get us stats on downloads and listens and things like that, but also push out to the major podcast publications.
Awesome. Luke, do you want to weigh in, and then we'll see if Reg has any last additions?
Yes, and I would say this ecosystem is more complex than one would imagine, and there's so many ways to proverbially skin this cat. And I think a lot of it comes down to what you're comfortable with. So I was an Adobe suite person, so I like using. So I actually have this sort of pretty big workflow here, but I like using Premiere because it has bins, and Audition doesn't have a bin structure. So what I end up and that's how I started. Now I use something called Descript, which actually does it does speech to text, and then it exports for me a project file that I bring into Premiere, and then I use Audition if I need to edit an individual clip further. So it'll open it in Audition and then put it right back in the Premiere timeline. And then I use Transistor FM to host, and the main reason I just chose them was because they had unlimited podcasts for a certain price when they were aggregating all of the listeners together, which I wanted to launch a lot of podcasts at IBM, so that was the right choice. But yeah, there's a lot of workflow, and people just using. You could just use, you could use iTunes. You could use even GarageBand. You could use, not iTunes. I meant to say. iMovie, but there's so many workflows, and I think it's really about the tool set that you feel comfortable with.
So I'll just add a couple thoughts in terms of just the actual recording and storing of it. My standard way to record it when I don't have a special additional option is using my iPhone voice memo, and then once I've done that, I immediately rename the memo and save it to Dropbox, and then share that Dropbox link with the people that will then transcribe it. However, sometimes if I and my interlocutor are both on Skype, Skype has a recording facility. And so what I can do is just hit record. There's only one downside to that, and that is that it records as an MP4, even if we're just doing audio. And so what I found is that using VLC Player, I can input an MP4 and save an MP3. And so I'll do that. I'll pipe it into there. And then sometimes when I do that, with Skype, there's a bit of lead time. And so you don't want to start talking to you sure it's recording. And so in order to trim off the beginning and end, then I might use some audio editing software just to kind of trim that down. So those are sort of the other thing I will mention is that there is one other place that's commonly used, and that I perceive that the people I'm working with also use to store that, and that is SoundCloud. And so just for everybody's awareness, that SoundCloud is sort of YouTube for voice. And so if you're looking for a place to store audio stuff, that's a really good place to be aware of. Back to you.
All right. Well, we are coming to the close of our planned time, but I've got one more question that I want to bring out. And it kind of comes from something that we talked about in our preparation for this call. We're living in just, fascinating times. I once went to a live conference, a big IBM conference years ago, where the maestro of the Boston Symphony was speaking, and his name's going to come back to me in just a second. Xander, maybe it'll come back to me. But the thing that he always said was, when something unexpected happens in your world, approach it as how fascinating. So we're living in fascinating times, and I think that you both have ways that your conversations in your podcasts are reflecting some of what's going on now, either among the technology or how we're enabling people. Reg, do you want to start, and then Alex finish up in terms of what you've brought in from the world around us into your podcasting?
So I guess I'm sort of trying to think of how to process the question. You're thinking of just in terms of all the unexpected things that have happened, or just the ambient things that are going on?
Well, all of it. I think we talked about a conversation that you had with another champion, Herb Daly, in terms of like there's been a whole big set of
Right,
conversations around COBOL and how that
right.
affects what you have been talking about in the mainframe. And then there's a whole big set of conversations around, I think, Herb is focused on enabling people on this technology that some people, never me, would say is old or whatever,
Good
and
point.
just that whole that
Sure.
broader conversation that brings up.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. Thank you. The current issues, whether you're talking about the pandemic or social justice issues or things such as needing to get a new generation on the mainframe, those do turn in not only to good topics for podcasts, but even good excuses. And so you mentioned Dr. Herb Daly. He and I, basically got to know each other last week. And by the end of the week, I'd interviewed him for one of my podcasts just because it was like, wow, this is so cool. You've got so much interesting stuff to say and you have such a unique mainframe experience. And so not only is the topic itself relevant, but even the connection came from what was happening in the world around us. It was just like, here's this connection that was created by that. And so I think that those is really important also because it's important that the subject matter stay fresh. And I think that's one of the key things. You can't pre-record too many podcasts because you're not going to be able to help talking about what's in the news. It's almost impossible because of the authenticity of it. You're going to make jokes about stuff, you make observations. Alex, what do you think?
Well, one of obviously the thing that is affecting folks or has affected folks for the last few months has been the coronavirus and the pandemic going around. And what I thought was really interesting was how some of our customers were dealing with that. One of the really interesting things that I had a conversation with someone about recently was how they were using the Maximo tool set to manage their supply of PPE for their employees across their organization. So Maximo has a number of supply chain features for it in order to get material in to do work and that type of thing. And they were using Maximo to manage their N95 mask supply across all of their different plants and sites throughout the state. So I thought that was really an interesting use case, and we were actually helping out in creating specific, COVID-19 reports out of Maximo to show stakeholders how they were dealing with things. So just, I love how flexible the IBM technology is there and how it's able to meet just any type of demand like that.
Cool.
That's awesome. Thanks, you guys. All right. I know we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank you guys very much, Alex and Reg and Alex, for being here with us, our premier guests on our new regularly scheduled IBM Champion Chats live streams. Folks can look for us again in 2 weeks around July 25th. We're still confirming that guest, but it'll be out there on Twitter, and you can find us at ibm.com/champion. And then, Reg and Alex, if you want to say just one last brief word and tell everybody where they can find your podcasts. Alex, do you want to start there and sign us off?
First, I just want to say thank you to you all for having us on. Reg, it's been really great to meet you and have these conversations. So, I'm really excited for what you've got going on, and you've given me some great ideas on how to make my podcast a better platform for our listeners. So, you can find us at the link below. It's the Alex Ask Anything podcast. We should be on all the major podcast platforms. So give us a listen. Thanks again. Really appreciate being here.
Yeah, and thank you, Alex. It has been a real pleasure to get to know you, to chat with you. I've really enjoyed this opportunity to think out loud, really, about the whole podcasting experience. The link below will show you the Z Talks, or as we like to say in Canada, Zed Talks. The that'll show you like a nice historical archive. You go back all the way to 2016 of them, and just this experience is so neat because it's part of that whole great conversation of humanity. And I think one of the sad things over the past few decades is that television and radio, for all their goodness, have taken away our sense of involvement, of ownership of the conversation we're part of. And now the internet, remember Time Magazine declared you the person of the year. The internet and podcasting as part of that has brought people back into that conversation. We're now all interlocutors with the people that matter in our own lives. And I think this is such a wonderful moment in history when we get to all be partakers in the conversation that's driving forward humanity and our particular spaces. And so I'm just really excited to be part of it. And thank you all so much for the opportunity to talk with you about it today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you both so much for being here. And Luke, if you want to close out talking about the podcasts and live stream and webcasts that they can find IBM Developer. And I think you might have had a link to put up of where they can find at IBM Champions on Twitter, at IBM Developer on Twitter, and they can find me at ibm.com/champion. There you go. And thanks, y'all. Luke?
Yeah, I really also appreciate the opportunity to be involved in this. It's a really fun project for me because I get to meet all these folks and learn things, but also get to practice the live streaming. So I would say, yeah, please check out the IBM Developer content. We have YouTube. We are on all the major platforms for podcasting as well. We've got a high performance series, Japanese language podcast, data science podcast, and more to come soon.
All right. See you guys in a couple weeks. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, guys.